Thanks, John, and hi everybody. Very thrilled to be here. I'd like to acknowledge the... hang on, let me just see, what do I press here? Great. I'd like to acknowledge the Gimoy, the Walabara, the Indigi and the Irukandji people and all of the traditional owners of sea and land country in the Great Barrier Reef, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. In the spirit of the conference, I'll just say a little bit about me to start with. I was born about 6 blocks away from here in the Cairns Base Hospital, and my first reef experience would have been in early primary. I can't remember how old I was, when we had the experience to camp at Coromine Beach and walk out onto King Reef. And that was an amazing experience as a young person. What I'd like to talk about today is some insights from a monitoring, evaluation and learning set of activities that we undertook within the stakeholder engagement and traditional owner subprogram in the Reef Restoration and Adaptation program. There's been a few presentations over the course of the last couple of days from members of our subprogram, which has been fantastic. What I wanted to do is just give us a little bit of context to how those activities fit together, because it kind of does fit together into a broader suite of activities. So our subprogram, along with a number of other subprograms in RRAP, is one of the cross-cutting programs supporting restoration science and development to protect the reef in the face of climate change. The focus of the subprogram over the last 4 to 5 years has been social science to inform research and development. Our focus has been to support the development of interventions that are socially and culturally responsible and legitimate and acceptable to traditional owners, stakeholders, managers and the public. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-leads, Bruce Taylor, Dr. Bruce Taylor, who's at the back of the room, Professor Stuart Lockie, who is very disappointed not to be here this week. Our subprogram has a number of goals. Firstly, and this is a suite of activities that Professor Lockie has led, is around identifying social, economic, cultural risks and opportunities of interventions. There's a suite of activities led by Dr. Bruce Taylor and his colleagues at CSIRO around designing, piloting and evaluating novel engagement and partnering strategies in the GBR for reef restoration. And a third suite of activities, which is a suite that my team has been quite heavily involved in, is around adaptive learning for governance and kind of integration into decision-making within reef restoration. We've been working across different scales, trying to understand those perspectives from global or national to local, working in lots of different ways, different methods, engaging with different types of stakeholders and traditional owners in different regions along the GBR and in other places across Australia. It's important for us to acknowledge, recognise and find ways to work within rights and interest groups. And ultimately we want to support better decision making, drawing on the knowledge from the social science work that we're doing and using that to support better decision making about how we move forward with restoration at scale. This particular suite of activities that I'm presenting on now is about our monitoring, evaluation and learning that we've been working through over the last few years within the subprogram. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why we're doing that, what we've done and what are some of the insights that we've learned from that process. To take a step back, most of you would acknowledge, and there's been so many presentations and discussions about this over the last couple of days, that large-scale assisted ecosystem adaptation presents lots of different challenges. Engaging in an R&D program, engaging stakeholders and traditional owners in a complex R&D program is challenging. Some of the challenges are that the science is really uncertain. There's technical uncertainties, there's environmental uncertainties that Ken presented on really well today. We don't really know what's happening. We're modelling, we're trying to predict what's happening with environmental change, but we don't really know. There's also so much we don't know about our people and how people feel about the reef, what people are doing in different parts of the GBR. So the human dimensions are still not as well known as we'd like, although I acknowledge there's been lots of steps forward over the last 5 or 6 years. From a social perspective, we're trying to engage people in things that we really don't know what the benefits and risk perceptions are. And you heard from Sue today about the strategies that RRAP is putting in place to try and understand what those risks are and how to manage them. But the reality is that, they're uncertain risks, and that's challenging when you're engaging. We have unclear governance structures. We don't really know how to make some of these things happen in practice. We don't have fit-for-purpose regulatory and governance regimes. There are different knowledges in the reef, different ways of thinking about and valuing knowledge and understanding what's happening and where the solutions might come from. And of course, there's different ethics and perceptions around the risks of intervening. People think about ontological, should we do it, the ethics of doing something versus doing nothing in different ways, because we live in a pluralistic society, one of the joyful things about life. When we were designing the stakeholder and traditional owner subprogram, one of the models that we were thinking about is adapted from approaches to managing risk and deliberation in sort of large-scale technology interventions. And that model is based on the premise that you need good deliberative processes that allow different types of knowledge to come together and weigh up the risks and, importantly, the benefits of making decisions in the context of all of those uncertainties and all of those challenges. So we founded our sub-program on this, one of our foundations is this concept of deliberation. And Sue mentioned it before, creating the opportunity for people to come together, to share, to deliberate, and to decide what to do in the face of uncertainties. So why deliberation? Well, ideally, it's about including the diverse range of interests from traditional owners to the range of reef communities in decision-making processes. Ideally, it's about empowering communities and traditional owners to engage and participate in RRAP and receive benefits from their participation and empowerment. It's an approach to ensure that social risks and cultural risks and benefits of RRAP interventions are managed and distributed equitably, about achieving deliberative governance, which requires underpinning capabilities actually to allow that process of effective deliberation to occur. And reflection and learning is the key to all of that. In the monitoring, evaluation, learning strategy in the sub-program, it was a collective learning exercise within our stakeholder and engagement traditional owner sub-program, but actually drew on insights and reflections from others outside of our sub-program, but within RRAP generally. Our scope was to understand how effective our engagement activities have been at the sub-program level, and it was based on the objectives and outcomes around appropriateness based on a program logic that we developed. I'll talk a little bit about that. So fundamentally, it's about reflecting on what we're doing. Are we doing it well? Do we need to make changes? At the end of this R&D phase, thinking ahead, what might we need to do differently to fill gaps or achieve better outcomes for traditional owners and communities through this restoration program of work. So how we did it in practice, we developed a theory of change that we refined as collectively as a sub-program. We used that theory of change and program logic to identify what it was that we really wanted to hone in on our evaluation and learning, and that was around our effectiveness, our impact, and then some broader reflections from us going forwards. We thought about the data that we were going to use for that, and because there's so much data collection happening, particularly social data collection, there was a balance between drawing on what we had access to from the research that we were doing and supplementing that with key strategic interviews and discussions. And then that was used to underpin a series of internal, within sub-program and broader reflections for RRAP going forwards. Just to summarise, we drew on the findings of over 20 internal reports and about technical science material derived from the sub-program, 10 interviews and focus groups, and over 15 kind of follow-up discussions. So in terms of some of the lessons, in terms of effectiveness of the engagement subprogram, what we were looking at there is the extent to which our activities achieved our intended objectives. And in our analysis, we were looking for evidence of things like that our approach to engagement research enabled us to shift our focus as our understanding of what the whole program was doing and where communities were, as our understanding of that improved. And we saw that. We saw that the engagement research activities were flexible, they're adaptable, they provided lots of opportunities, and we heard about some of those earlier today, for networking, for deliberation, and for mutual learning between participants that we engaged with, between participants and us, and between us and our broader colleagues across RRAP. We found evidence that through the approach that we took, we were effectively engaging expectation management. And I mean that from the perspective that, you know, it's a challenging space when you're engaging people outside in something like RRAP because, you know, it's a slow-moving and at the same time fast-moving set of activities, and it's not clear, you know, when decisions will be made, who they'll be made, what the decisions will be, and so we're having to manage expectations. And we found evidence that we were doing that in quite an effective way for both participants and for RRAP itself. And there were consistent messages about RRAP that we, you know, provided to stakeholders that were consistent across a range of stakeholder groups and with what was happening, the dialogue within RRAP itself. Some of the findings are that, you know, it's not surprising, I'm sure, that there's high public support when people understand the science behind the interventions. The potential distribution of risks and benefits is still not very clear, but there's huge appetite in understanding that more. That we have generated new insights into engagement and recognising that, you know, we've had to adapt that to different time frames, values, attitudes and experiences, and we can now scale that up or scale that out or adapt those engagement experiences to meet the new emerging needs of RRAP. And co-learning is mutually beneficial. This quote here illustrates it, which I can't read on the screen because of the colour and the size. But I think it's about, you know, giving people direct exposure to RRAP and the benefits that they acknowledge by being involved. Some of the challenges is in around public understanding of reef restoration, and deliberation takes time to build and requires multiple conversations to allow that understanding to build. There are also some challenges around, and we heard a bit about this over the last couple of days, having the resources and the time to be flexible and adaptable and be able to respond to where communities' needs are or traditional owner needs are, be able to support them to be involved in deliberation. In terms of the impact of the subprogram, we were looking for evidence that the approaches to engagement research, you know, strive to give people a voice, and we found that they absolutely did. We saw evidence that capacity building did occur through the activities of the subprogram. People's capacity to be involved was built by their participation in our activities. We saw evidence that stakeholder decision-making in the project influenced project decisions sort of at that level. Like, for example, the community panel made decisions that were instrumental in the sites of monitoring activities at Reef. The stakeholder advisory group put together a range of recommendations that were presented to RRAP, and stakeholders led that, so that was good. Traditional owner and stakeholder voices have been absolutely valued at the project level, and there's definitely potential to scale up some of these frameworks, like the biocultural framework that Kirsten and Carl presented on earlier this morning. Some of the findings there are that the R&D program created opportunities for networking, deliberation and learning. The flexible approach to engagement was really positively acknowledged by both the broader program and, importantly, the stakeholders themselves. The impact of decision-making, of course, is ongoing work. There hasn't been a lot of time involved, you know, from when RRAP got started. We're starting to see the evidence of that engagement influencing decision-making, but the the test of that will be over the next few years as we're really thinking about kind of what are the next steps for RRAP. And so then, of course, there are questions about what comes next, how to scale and how to build on the momentum that's been generated over the last couple of years. Some of the challenges are that supporting engagement for reef restoration is challenging. It's a really big program and it's really complex and there's lots of moving parts and we don't always have visibility over those things, and that can create challenges for engaging people in a conversation about reef restoration at scale. Sometimes misaligned timeframes can create barriers to engagement as well. Synthetically, this process has allowed us or supported us to put together some key recommendations for ourselves as a sub-program and for the broader reef restoration program. It's identified that we need a better engagement strategy. We need to build and strengthen our partnerships with stakeholders and traditional owners. There's been some excellent work done. There's more work that we need to do, particularly around deepening our engagement with traditional owners beyond FPIC towards and beyond towards empowerment of traditional owner science in reef restoration. There's opportunities for us to strengthen how we connect social science knowledge into RRAP's decision making, and recommendations for us about how we can more actively engage communities and respond to concerns, how we can continue our innovative approaches and adapt them, and opportunities for the incorporation of reef restoration activities into reef governance structures, which is something that we need to start thinking about for the future. The process also, through the process is recommendations that we might want to scale this beyond the stakeholder engagement sub-program to think about the opportunity to reflect and learn as a broader program. And I think this is really beneficial because there's so many elements to it. There's the technical elements, there's pilot deployments. How we deliberate across all of those different knowledges and all of those different elements is just a really important thing for us to do so that we can be adaptively managing and adapting our program for the future. Of course, I'd like to acknowledge all of the people who've been involved in this work to date. Our team there on the left of the slide, but importantly the broader range of folks from across CSIRO, James Cook Uni, QUT, UQ, social scientists, our sub-program colleagues, the Indigenous Partnerships team, Trotwater, and everybody who's been involved in helping us to reflect on what we've done to date. Thank you.